I think you always don't question that, like, why are we doing it, what is the data, why is this the right time to do it, kind of things, right? So as you go through this, you'll actually know if it's the real problem you're trying to solve or no.
And one big thing about a PRD is making sure you have a consensus from your leadership. Who are the approvers for each of these individual teams? Making sure to add them and making sure to get their approval once the PRD goes through.
It's a living document which you so keep socializing with the engineering counterparts and other people or the other stakeholders, and you keep getting
The
buy-in.
more time you spend on this section, the more time you'll be saving for yourself and your team in understanding this problem and making sure this gets prioritized.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our podcast, Everything Product. So, we talk about product management concepts and latest technology here. I am Sid Saladi.
Hi everyone, this is Phani Vuyyuru.
Hey, so we are back again recording together. So, in the last 10 episodes, we were interviewing product leaders. So, if you haven't checked those videos out, please check from the link above. So, we have a very interesting topic today. So, which are product requirement documents, right? So, these product requirement documents are the bread and butter of a product manager, and product managers spend a lot of time, writing product requirement documents. So we look into why a product requirement document is important, what are some details that go into this, and how would you basically also socialize this and get some buy-in on the product you're going to build, or the initiative you're going to build. So let's start with a simple question here. Hey, Funny, why do you think product requirements document is important?
Sure, Sidhu. So, like you said, right, product requirements document is the one source of truth which the entire team uses to see what is the problem that we are solving, why are we solving for it, what exactly is the customer need, what do we need to build in order to solve that problem, and finally, once we launch, how do we measure the success of what we built. So, in order for the entire team to be on the same page, in order for us to make sure all the stakeholders are on the same page, and in order to bring your engineering and design teams to clearly understand the problem, product requirements document is the biggest source of truth. So that's the reason I would say it's needed for every product team.
Essentially, you're saying that there'll be a lot of eyes on this, so be careful while writing it. Right. Yeah, and
Yep.
I think you summed it up real good, right? So it is a single source of truth, and it covers the why, what of things, and when are you going to actually deliver stuff. So should we quickly walk through template Funny and see how does that look like, and go into each of these sections?
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Let's start with this template that I have here, right? This is one of the templates that I continually use in order to deliver my initiatives. So let me briefly walk through all the sections that we have here and what do I typically do to fill in each of these sections. So let me start with the overall, right? What is the overall product title? What is the gist or a simple TLDR of what is this initiative trying to do? Give basic details about what is the organization, what is the team, who are the basic stakeholders who are driving each of these initiatives or the features within that, and if additional teams are applicable, adding those. And one big thing about a PRD is making sure you have a consensus from your leadership. Who are the approvers for each of these individual teams? Making sure to add them and making sure to get their approval once the PRD goes through. Before we go into each of these individual sections, right? The top level sections that we typically look at is one is the overall problem. The second one is what is the solution that we are doing in order to solve the problem. And then finally, what is the launch? Like basically your GTM plan to clearly tell how you are launching it, tracking it, and seeing how the initiative is performing. The last section is basically just for the documentation, which is to keep all the resources at one place so that everyone can come here to clearly understand all the other artifacts that are involved with the project. So let's start with the overall problem section, right? So I can quickly give a brief about why this is needed and what do I do, and then we can go back and forth on that. So the first one is the problem statement, right? As product managers, one of the biggest things that we do is clearly understanding what is the customer problem and identifying the corresponding solutions for it. Given that we talk to customers on a daily basis, right, it might be very clear for us to explain what the problem is. But take it engineering team or design teams or any other stakeholders, they might not be talking to a customer on a daily basis. So our biggest responsibility is to make sure everyone clearly understands what is the problem that we are tackling. So this section plays a very key role in that. So the first one that we'll be dealing with is what is the problem and why does it matter. So in this section, what I typically do is I talk about all the customer pain points. Let's say your operations team is the user of this initiative. You clearly explain that, hey, in order for my operations team to perform a certain thing, currently it is taking 10 different clicks for them. It's taking this much amount of time. So when they're trying to onboard a customer, it's taking a lot of time and issues for them. And then what data does it support? This is also very critical because this might be coming as one feedback from one operations team. So if you end up building a huge feature for it, it might benefit only one, two people. So do we even want to prioritize that? Rather, do you want to prioritize something else? So in order to clearly explain why this is such a big problem, gathering some qualitative or quantitative data and clearly telling that, hey, I heard this from 10 different stakeholders. I've also seen some data on how the product is being used, and I can clearly tell that this is a big problem. And finally, why is now the right time to solve this problem? You can have 10 other problems that you're currently solving in this quarter, but is it actually aligning with the overall vision for the product, vision for the company? And is it aligning with the overall business objectives that we planned for this quarter or not? So this is the section that they typically use to add all of these values. And by the time this section is completed, everyone who reads through the document should clearly understand the problem, and they should be fired up to say, hey, I want to solve this problem now so that my customers, my ops teams, my customer success teams can be benefited by it. What do you think, Sidhu?
Awesome. Yeah, I always say that, right? Like, product is like the master of problems. So you are the person who knows problems better than anybody in the room or in the team, right? So I think this is a space where you have to spend a lot of time and also nail it down so that everybody understand what they're solving for, right? If they don't understand what they're solving for, you're getting it wrong from the get-go itself. So I think that's when you specifically mentioning what the details of what the problem is, clearly helps people understand what we are trying to solve here. And also I feel that, right, sometimes when you are always in the weeds trying to talking to customers and understand what the problems are, some of the problems might be very obvious to you, but it might not be obvious to the team or somebody who is looking at a different view of what the problem is, right? So I think it's very important to talk about what the problem is, why is it important, and where did you get the data, so that people understand the rationale between prioritizing this problem space, I'd say. So I think, yeah, a couple of things which I normally try to follow while defining a problem here is, right, I previously used to make a mistake of explaining the problem at a very high level, but looking at how people understand and react to it, have modified the way which I write the problems in a PRD. You have to make it as simple as it is, right? You have to make it so simple that a 5-year can understand, and anybody just going through that understands it and then goes through the flow. That's a couple of tips I would say people should could follow.
Yep. That I totally agree with that, right? If you don't actually clearly write the problem and explain why we are trying to solve that right now, you're going to have multiple meetings with individual stakeholders explaining why do you have to solve for it. And if by any chance you're unable to get one of these things prioritized, then you will have to talk to individual people and explain clearly what's in your mind, and then go do additional research and put it. The more time you spend on this section, the more time you'll be saving for yourself and your team in understanding this problem and making sure this gets prioritized.
And also sometimes, right, like when you're actually going through writing the problem, right, you'll find out maybe this might not be the right problem which I want to solve, right? There are other problems which I want to, you realize that, right? Because I think you always don't question that, like, why are we doing it? What is the data? Why is this the right time to do it? Kind of things, right? So as you go through this, you'll actually know if it's the real problem you're trying to solve or no.
That is true. Awesome. Let's jump into the solution.
Yeah.
Cool. There are a few sections in this one as well. So the very first one that I typically begin with is, what is the long-term vision for the product? Many times what happens is, you know, the smaller problem that you're trying to solve, but is it actually worth spending just 2 to 3 weeks on it? But is it a problem that might span for few quarters or more than a year or so? If that is the case, then it's good to clearly define the vision for the product, because that will make sure people understand that, hey, this is not a small thing that I'm trying to build. This is a huge thing that's going to help my customers for multiple years. Another thing to keep in mind here is, as engineers or our design teams, etc., they always want to work on initiatives that are large scale initiatives helping the company as a whole. So if you can fire up this section and explain clearly that, hey, this is a huge problem that we are trying to solve for our customers, our teams will be very motivated and interested to solve for it. Another big thing is, even though you're defining the long term vision for the product, another thing to keep in mind is, who are you solving for? If you can't clearly explain who is being benefited by this initiative, then you're going to build something else which is not going to solve the problem for one specific customer. It might be generic, nobody might end up using it. So clearly explaining, okay, within my operations team, the onboarding team is the one that is getting benefited. Or once the onboarding is done, then probably it's the activation team that's getting benefited by this individual feature, so that you clearly know who you're solving for. And then final couple of sections that we typically fill in this is, what is the proposed solution? So now that you know the problem, you clearly explain, hey, these are all the things that I want to build in this as part of this PRD. This might span across a few different features. So you might probably end up adding a table or column or something like that, explaining all of those details. And then you add few milestones to tell that, hey, by this time frame, I'm gonna achieve this first milestone of letting them create something, and then letting the customers edit, probably that's the second milestone, and finally the third one is activation, etc. And then when you're typically writing through all of this, I'm sure there are a lot of open questions, issues, and decisions that'll come up. Not just for writing it, right? Let's say you're reviewing this with your stakeholders, you might come up with few questions. This is the section where you track all of those things, so that you clearly know that, hey, these are still open items and I can't start working on this until some of these are addressed. So, what do you think?
Yeah. So as we were saying, right, in the previous section, which is the problem space, where the product is the master of problem, right? When we get into the solution space, right, engineering is the master of solution, right? So you know when I think about this specific section, right, so you are basically defining a problem and then going into the solutioning sessions with a lot of different engineers who are trying to solve the problem. There could be multiple different solutions the way you can solve the problem, right? So and it's also important that you identify what is the solution you're picking and why are you picking the solution you're picking for. So let's maybe take an example, right? So imagine there is an old lady sitting in a house, and it's a problem for her to open the door always. So we have to figure out a solution for that. There are multiple different ways to solve the solution, right? Either maybe you can give her a phone with an app which unlocks the door automatically, or maybe you can give her a hardware remote which when he or she clicks on that would open the door. And there could be also a device which is voice enabled, which can open the door, right? But we want to pick the solution which is most ideal for that customer and also ties back to the company goals, revenue goals, etc., and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of variables into it. That's why when you are in this solutioning sessions with so many people around, people might think one solution is what you're talking about, and it's always very difficult to come on the same page for with so many people. So I think this acts as a single source of truth for understanding what the solution might be, right? So, and once you go through the solution and finalize the solution, it's very important to get the buy-in of an engineering manager or anybody who's an engineering counterpart to agree upon what you're trying to solve here, right? And so on and so forth.
I love that example, Sidhu. So let's deep dive a little bit more into that, right? So there is an old lady sitting in her chair, and it's difficult for her to go to the door all the time and open the door. So now, when you're thinking about milestones, right? Let's begin with that. So let's say your company is something that builds a hardware for the doors, and let's say you installed everything for it. Your very first and very simple milestone could be a remote that you can give to her so that she can click on it and the door just latches open. And your second milestone could be building a mobile app, and that mobile app basically connects to your hardware and then lets you open. Let's say the third milestone could be even more easier, where you're having some kind of a voice assistant where she can talk to it and then let it make sure there is a link to the door opening and closing of the systems. And then finally, there could be a way where you might have like hardware cameras attached to it so that it can clearly understand who is coming, who is going, and based on that, probably it can automate the opening of the doors and stuff. So these could be the clear milestones that you can lay out so that folks understand that, hey, we are starting with very simple solution. Then once we track how good the solution is performing, then we'll continually improve that so that our customers feel happy about the solution. And this is the best place to explain all of that so that they can clearly understand.
Yeah, and I want to bring up another point, right? So once you're done creating this, it's never done, right? So you might have a milestone and you might define what the solution is and then maybe come up with some success metrics, but at some point you might have to pivot to a different solution or pivot to a different variation of what you have created. So that's why it's a living document which you keep socializing with the engineering counterparts and other people or the other stakeholders, and you keep getting buy-in.
Yep. Cool. Let's jump to the next one. So the
Yeah.
last and most important section is basically the launch. So you have done two things so far. One is you clearly define the problem statement and what is the impact to the customers. After that, you clearly defined your solutions, telling that, hey, these are all the milestones that we are going to achieve by building these features. So now you need to clearly understand what are the timelines involved for it. So let's say the first milestone you set up is for this quarter. Then you can probably have a Jira roadmap telling that, hey, we are going to build these hardware devices, we are going to build these remotes, door locks, etc. And then you can create an individual timeline for each of that and see how each of them are performing. Then where and how will this product be launched? Because you can launch for the entire United States at the same time. You can launch for one specific state, one specific city, one specific county, etc. So if you're trying to experiment a certain thing, it's good to clearly define where you're trying to launch this, who is the targeted customer that will be launched for, etc. So that folks can understand. Because it's not just you who's building it. Your marketing team might need to create some materials to explain what we are trying to do. Your customer success might have to explain to their customers, telling that, hey, this is new product that we are launching, so this is how we can use it. There might be launch materials that you need to create. You might have to post several messages online. So all of it will be targeted based on what you explain here. Once that is done, let's say you launch the product. What are all the metrics that you're targeting? Let's say you have certain KPIs that you're tracking to improve for this quarter. So you're going to link these features to those KPIs so that folks can clearly understand that, hey, by launching this feature, Phani is targeting to improve this KPI from this percentage to this percentage. So that clearly correlates to the overall goals. And then finally, what does the success mean for each of these KPIs? Let's say you launched it, you were anticipating, let's say 5%, and let's say you got only 2%. Is it a success? If it is 2%, what do you plan to do with that? So all of those things should be defined here so that folks can clearly understand that okay, it's 2%. Phani already planned for the 2%. Now he told we are going to tweak this by doing additional things and stuff. So that's how you put your entire launch plan so that folks can clearly understand how you launch it. Siddhu, what do you think?
Yeah, and when this section comes up, right? What comes to my mind is, whenever I go back to engineering asking for the timelines for solutions and all, they're like, no, we don't want to give set timelines. But I think it is good to have some kind of a tentative date, right, for timelines and launch and all, because I think there are bigger things at a higher level that could play a significant role in the launch plan, right? So there could be other products the company is launching, and you could have a very small launch window where you can get the best out of that launch window. And also marketing has to start a lot of GTM stuff before you launch a product, right? And I think trying to get that tentative date and check all the other factors that could be involved in launching a product could help you understand whether you have to delay some of this stuff or accelerate some of this stuff, and maybe get more resources to accelerate some of the solutioning process which the engineering team is going through.
Yeah, that is true. You tell a very good point, right? Many times you only think about the development side of things, but there's a lot of other things go beyond that. And in order for us to align all of those stakeholders with the solution that you're building, this is the section that you need to fire up to make sure everyone understands that, hey, once engineering is done, marketing is doing this, sales is doing this. So that clearly paints a picture of everything that happens after the development.
Yeah, and maybe to give a very a quick example here, funny. So previously when I was working for Bosch, right? Bosch, apart apart from also doing automotive diagnostic tools and all, they have power tools, Bosch tools, right? These are tools you can drill holes and all of these things, right? So they kind of did a new version of that every 2 years. And Father's Day was their biggest sales event where they had to release a product, right? So keeping that in context in mind, if the product team missed that deadline, they would have missed 60% of the sales that could have happened. So I think that's very important to keep in mind, right? If you think you're not able to hit that deadline, maybe go reaching out to the stakeholders or leadership asking for more help where they can accelerate some of this process would be something which you do, figuring out or nailing down some details in this section, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Like same thing goes with like depending on the company, right? So for example, Intuit, tax season is one of the biggest things. So you can't miss the timeline. So based on the timeline, if you have to reduce your scope or anything like that, you can try to plan for it. Same way, let's say you work for an e-commerce company. You have Thanksgiving coming up, Christmas coming up. That's the biggest sale. You can't tell that, hey, my development is going to take another couple of months, so we are going to miss the timeline. It's not going to benefit the business or the customer in any way.
Yeah.
Cool. And just the final thing is it's a tedious process to keep everything in track, but I would always recommend people to link their corresponding Jira projects, Figma designs. If you have any RFCs, just basically technical design, adding those details, any GTM presentations and stuff, dashboards for the metrics, etc. So that everyone can come here and find exactly what they need so that they don't have to bookmark each of them, or if there is any other new links that comes for the initiative, even if they don't know it, they have everything in one place so that they can come here, see through those, add any questions, comments and stuff.
Like, I don't know if others use this link, but I go to this space every time, right? The link and resources space, because that is like, a place where I find all the information that is linked to your product, right? So yeah.
Yep. So overall, just to summarize for everyone who is listening, right, there are three primary sections. One is problem, second is solution, third one is launch. The biggest time spent you need to do is on the problem section, where you clearly explain the problem, the user statements, why is this the right time, so that everyone clearly understands the problem. After that, you talk about the solutions that you have in mind. This will be evolving as you continue to build the product, but you will be working with your engineering, design teams, etc., to define what exactly you want to build. You clearly define the milestones so that folks understand that, hey, this is not one time thing that Phani or Siddhu is building, but this is going to span across few quarters and there are several other things that's coming up in the future. And then finally, you talk about your go to market and clearly explain how you plan to launch this and track the success of this product so that folks can understand even if it fails, there is additional plans in place. And they can also clearly understand how it's being marketed to all the customers. And finally, making sure to add all of your resources at one place so that you can clearly track it. So then let me ask one question to you, right? So let's say you clearly wrote your PRD document, you explained everything, but what if someone comes at midpoint and gives you additional things? Like let's say, hey, I spoke to the customer again. Looks like this problem has tweaked a little bit. How do you solve for those things in your PRDs?
Yeah, I think this comes up all the time, right? So either things change, preferences change, or even sometimes the company goals change and stakeholders come back saying that, hey, I think we don't need the other thing you're building. You have to build something new, right? I think that's when you have to bring back that data analysis mode where you try to understand, right? Like what is the data behind that? Ask the why, right? Why is this something which you want to build, and why is it appropriate to the goal you want to get to, and is it aligned with the company initiatives, and also is it aligned with the KPIs or the OKRs which you have defined for that quarter. And based on that you would basically change things in the PRD. And you see this all all the time, right? People come to you all the time to change something, add something, change the scope, kind of things and all. Yeah.
Awesome. Let me ask one more question to you. So let's say you wrote the PRD, you spent a couple of weeks on it, you did some thorough analysis. How do you know that your PRD is ready to go to the design team or to the engineering? How do you do the transition?
Yeah, I think one thing which everybody has to keep in mind is, right, writing the PRD is a lot of effort, but I think the next level, taking this to the next level, is socializing this and getting comments and getting that buy-in. I think that's when you say that, okay, you reach out to your senior leadership asking the buy-in, because each individual stakeholder might have a different purview which you might not have, which they bring into the table to the PRD, right? So senior leaders might talk to you what the priorities are. They might know what the initiatives are which you can actually incorporate in PRD, where engineering might have different strengths, right? Every engineering team might not be able to implement every solution possible, right? So that you'll get that visibility from the engineering and their buy-in. And design might have a lot of different things in there, right? So I think the next thing you would do is socialize this with everybody and get that sign off, right? Because this is what we want to commit for, and then we'll change it as we go, but overall idea, the problem will still remain the same.
Got it. The funny thing that I keep observing is my first draft of PRD versus what I finally complete would change by at least 40-50%. The reason is I keep finding new things, or when I keep finding new things and when I ask additional people, they keep adding additional details to say, hey, Phani, these are the additional problems that I have. Or coming from engineering, hey, Phani, these could be the additional solutions that we could put together. There is a drastic change from the time I started to the time I tell that, hey, design team, my PRD is done. Now let's start talking about the designs.
Also, sometimes you realize that, right? Even um, you do the PRD, socialize it, get the sign off, and then publish it, then start working on the product, right? At some point somebody from a different team looks at the PRD, comes back to you asking questions, and then you go back to your PRD and realize, hey man, this is already out of date, you have to make changes. And that has happened to me a lot of times.
That's true. Let me ask one more thing to you, Sidhu. Um, how do you define whether you need to write a detailed PRD or not for a specific initiative? Is it based on the size of the initiative? Is it based on the size of the problem? How do you do that?
Yeah, I would say, right, if you have something that is at a small feature level, I normally tend to add all of these details into the epics itself. In Jira, you have like why what is the business value, why are you, what is the customer problem, right? What is the definition of done, kind of thing. So I think any small features could be written at that level, and it is closer to engineering team working on that, so it's easier for them to access that too. But anything that is a larger initiative which requires thorough research, understanding, and also takes multiple quarters to build, I would say having a PRD would help, because there are a lot of people working on it at a time, and you cannot answer everybody's questions about the product. So anybody having any questions, you can divert them to this space, I'd say. And even when you are not there, people know what is expected, what the why of the product is, and what is the solution which we have agreed upon.
Makes sense. Yeah, 100%. I do it in a similar fashion too. One more thing that I typically do is having that conversation with your engineering counterpart too, because primarily PRD is helpful for the engineering. So asking that person to say, hey, do you actually need a detailed PRD for this? How do you think this is a bigger problem as well? Gives you a little bit more inputs, because many a times in my head this is a straightforward thing, but others might not perceive it the same way. So having that conversation sometimes helps as well.
That's right. And maybe let me ask you a question, Fanny. So have you used ChatGPT to write PRDs, and did it help
Yeah,
you?
yeah, 100%. So I definitely see a huge transition in myself when I wasn't using ChatGPT versus using it now, right? Because uh, I I can tell this very clearly that I'm not an expert in English. I'm an expert in clearly understanding the customer problem. But in order for me to write it clearly, I can write a version for it 100%. But giving it to ChatGPT and making it more clear is actually beneficial for your customers. Sometimes asking ideas also helps. For example, let's say you have some KPIs in mind, but let's say you ask ChatGPT and tell that, hey, how do you measure for it? You might get additional ideas on what else you want to track in order to get the success of it. So, yeah, I would highly encourage everyone to use ChatGPT or any other LLMs to like tweak your documents and stuff.
Yeah, and in my experience, and I feel that it is really good for ideation, where you have different thoughts and different ideas on how to do certain things, but it still gives you a basic thing, right? You have to put all your knowledge and understanding the product into that, right? So I'd say, yeah, but it'll give you a really good framework of how it is, and also once you have a final version of it, it'll help you word it in a much better way. Even Grammarly does that, right? Something similar, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the way I see ChatGPT, especially for PRDs, is it doesn't know the problems. You'll have to explain the clear problem and tell, hey, give me certain wording for it. It's an expert or an English teacher that can clearly tell what you can write there. But what you need to write, like what exactly is the problem, you are the expert in doing that.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. That's all what we have for you guys. Thank you so much for listening. And if you guys have any additional comments on what PRDs do you use, what other sections do you use within this document, don't forget to like comment in the comment section. Thank you.
Thank you.